what the pre-agile era was.
Both the customer and the service provider were caught in a trap.
So how do you think the need for scaling agile beyond one team to a larger team of teams? Hello, and welcome to a very special episode where we travel back in time when agile was just something that you wanted to do in your morning yoga class. Today, we are peeling back the layers of 2 decades of agile, the good, the bad, and the downright chaotic stand-ups, and someone who has seen it all, done it all, and probably facilitated a retro about it as well. I am Satyajit Nath, and I head India Agile at Capgemini. With 21 years of experience, I've been part of many agile transformation across industries. Today, I'm excited to explore this incredible evolution with someone who has been shaping it and hear his perspectives. Joining us today is Neeraj Bachani, the head of consulting at Nuearcus. Neeraj is a SVCT and a true agile trailblazer with more than 25 years of IT experience. He has been enabling companies go from doing agile to actually being agile and doing it without losing their sanity. So grab your coffee, your Kanban board, and maybe a sticky note or two, because we are able to sprint through the evolution, the challenges, and the future of agile in a way which will take you on an exciting journey. So Neeraj, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Satya. Thank you for the introduction. I am very excited to be here with you discussing about the last 2 decades of agile journey and, of course, the road map forward.
Great. Let's start with the basics, the origin story, as we call it. Can you set the stage for us by describing what the pre-agile era was, especially in your journey in HCL technologies in the early 2000s?
Definitely, Satya. I started my IT career back in 1999 with HCL Technologies, and the most commonly used methodology at that time was the waterfall, which was one of the approaches that was predominant across all organizations. What we did basically in that methodology was follow a very linear and a sequential process, which often led to long cycle times and limited flexibility. And as we all know now, both the customer and the service provider were caught in a trap in which the scope was fixed, and at the other end the plans were also fixed. While the projects were planned in great detail upfront, later on adapting to any changes which became the reality of the IT industry was very, very challenging. And like I mentioned, in HCL Technologies, we were following the waterfall method. We used to create big documents called the business requirement documents. The managers would come out with the project plan, which was kind of fixed throughout the project with no changes allowed, and all nitty-gritties in terms of the subtasks, in terms of the plans, were all pre-decided for the team by the project manager. Later on, as we moved along, we also found that figuring out everything at the very beginning causes multiple problems. For example, you are committing to something which you are not aware of, and later on the changes can be harmful or detrimental to both the customer and the service provider.
I can very well relate to that, Neeraj. Kind of long night outs that people had to cater to what the requests are and all of it. So thank you for bringing that up. I think the Agile Manifesto in 2000s disrupted everything. What was your first reaction when you came across it?
Definitely, the Agile Manifesto at that time when it was introduced brought in principles that really focused on prioritizing the customer needs and the collaboration of the customer, bringing in rapid feedback cycles and a very good mechanism for responsiveness to any change. Right? It started challenging the status quo of the projects running at that time by shifting the focus from the documentation to working software, empowering team collaboration, and looking at embracing change at all levels. Now, this was, a very sharp departure from the structured approach that was being followed for so many years. And definitely, any change that comes in has to face some kind of a skepticism. Eventually, the Agile Manifesto, with its values, with its principles, and later on the practices of Scrum, Kanban, and much later the scaling Agile practices, they started gaining a lot of traction because it started demonstrating the effectiveness for delivering a working software, as we say, compared to the documentation. At the same time, it was also a challenge for people to start adopting such a change because everybody, first of all, was not aware about the Agile Manifesto. And then, second, everybody started to have their own understanding of how the Agile, especially the manifesto's values and principles, can be brought to the ground and made to work. So that led to a kind of chaos because while some organizations kept following waterfall to an extent, the other organizations started to move to Agile Manifesto, its values, its principles, and eventually the practices what we have in Scrum, Kanban, and later on, like I said, the scaling Agile practices.
I'm sure you would have faced a lot of pushback. People who had been doing waterfall for a very long time would have said, no, I have been doing it, I have been successful at it, so why shift? Can you share some personal experiences of the transition from waterfall to the early agile days of implementation? What was it like?
Uh, Definitely, Satya. So, fortunately, coincidentally, I got introduced to agile ways of working very early in 2007, 2008 in India. Those were the times, when I said organizations had started to transition from waterfall to agile ways of working. And I still remember for one of the organizations, it was a small startup. I got an opportunity to work like a scrum master, although the definition of scrum master at that time was also not very clear, but I could sense, I could see that smaller organizations at that time were very much open to adopt agile and scrum practices to begin with because they did not have too much of a baggage to carry from their past. And I still remember those days in that startup playing the role of a scrum master, how the teams would come together. They had a very small scope defined in the sprint, and they were looking to accomplish that small scope every sprint with the help of each other's skill, with the help of collaboration. And even the management of that startup was willing to help because they felt, the way forward for them was to start experimenting with this way of working and looking at how to accomplish customer value very quickly. Now, at the end of every sprint, team would demonstrate what they have achieved so far, although they were still struggling with achieving their predictability. But at the same time, the management started to get involved and engaged by attending their demos, giving a feedback as if the customer would have given. They also started supporting the team, especially the Scrum Master, in ensuring that the roadblocks or the impediments are getting removed for such a team to achieve their sprint goal. At the same time, the team was also in a mode to start learning new things about Scrum. Kanban also started to get in a lot of attention at the time, and they could look at how these two ways of working can be brought together to achieve predictability from Scrum and at the same time achieving a faster flow, faster cycle time with the help of Kanban.
It must have been an interesting time, starting as a project manager doing waterfall and eventually moving on to role of an agile scrum master, then a coach and maybe a trainer. How did your career evolve from the old roles to where you are right now, which is an agile coach and a trainer?
Definitely, Satya. That's a very interesting question and definitely close to my heart because journey into agile coaching was driven by passion for improving processes, bringing the teams to a level where they can achieve their potential. At the same time, looking at the business problems, the business challenges, what organizations are facing, and how we can amalgamate or marry the business goals that the organization expects with the practices that have been brought in with experience from Scrum, from Kanban, later on from SAFe, and get those two to work together in tandem. Now, when I worked as a project manager, I also got exposed to various methodology challenges, especially in waterfall. But as I went through the agile journey, I started realizing that this is very close to my heart, and the processes definitely play a very important role in making sure the organization achieves its predictability, its value, and even looks at resolving their impediments and challenges on time with the help of the management. All these combined, since I had worked with a project manager, and I also have a very, very strong inclination for ensuring that people are empowered, brought me more closure to work first as a trainer, in which the knowledge is imparted to people, and then as a coach who really needs to work very closely with the team, with the management, to ensure that whatever has been trained gets implemented on the ground, Satya.
Great point. It must have been a lot of unlearning and then relearning, that journey of yours. What were those pivotal moments in this journey that shaped your agile philosophy and the approach that you have taken over the years?
Definitely. There have been a lot of moments, Satya, when I got to encounter that how the philosophy that I have learned over a period of time gets implemented on the ground. In one of the examples, I still remember I was assigned as a coach for Finacle, that's world's largest banking software. It was under the company called Edgeworth. And that is where, the organization that was already working for Waterfall for so many years had developed a mindset about working in large batches, delivering projects at a time, as per the customer expectation, and then eventually reworking on those projects because a lot of times either the scope had to be changed, the releases were not met on deadline, or there were certain changes that came at the last minute. And in that journey, the fascinating part was first to look at interacting with the management, the leadership, making them understand, how the agility works and how we can really benefit out of the agile ways of working and scaling together. And at the same time, working very closely with the managers and their teams to ensure that they first of all align with what this new way of working is and how can they deliver value to their customer with the support of their management. Apart from this, the teams also had to look at improving their technical practices, which in terms comes from DevOps, the delivery pipelines, and even the engineering practices that they started to bring in to ensure that the code quality is not suffering just because there is an additional process that has been brought in. So making this combined together was a very fascinating journey because we had a group of agile coaches working together. The focus was, like I said, in bridging the gap between what the expectation of the customer is and how the teams can work in collaboration to deliver them. I think that was one of the moments that I really enjoyed in my entire career. This transformation was happening for Finacle.
I think this brings in a very interesting perspective. Finacle, I'm sure, would have been a large program. I mean, I know you used to call it program those days.
Right.
Hundreds of people, multiple teams.
Right.
Obviously, a single team's work will not work. So, how do you think the need for scaling agile beyond one team to a larger team of teams led to the frameworks like what we have now, which is SAFe or less or Nexus? How do you look at it?
Definitely. Definitely, Satya. Initially, when Agile and Scrum came into the limelight, into the picture, very few organizations and products that were really using them, and they were much smaller in size, which means possibly one or two or maybe up to three teams can work together in Scrum without worrying about the challenges that are brought in by scaling. As Agile matured, of course, successes at these teams level spurred interest in extending these benefits across the entire organization and not just limiting itself to one or two teams. And that is where a lot of frameworks like SAFe, Less, Nexus, they all emerged and they started providing the structure and the guidance for achieving enterprise agility, addressing complexities of coordination, alignment, and resource allocation at scale. Now, each of these frameworks definitely brings its own structure, its own benefits, and sometimes a set of their own challenges. And as an agile transformation consultant and a coach, the real job of such a person is to ensure which framework amongst these is the best suited one for the organization. Like I said, each one of them brings its own set of structures. It's not one size that can fit all. And the organization should also be working very closely with the consultant, with the coach, to help understand which framework can bring them benefits at a larger level, first of all, and eventually in the longer run. And that is where I think each one of them has its own merits and demerits to ensure that, in a certain scenario, the organization should be using a specific kind of a framework.
It's a great point, Neeraj. It's not exactly taking a framework and just putting it in your system. It needs experience. And I think that's where you talked about understanding the merits and demerits of each of them and customizing it for your needs. I've seen you implement SAFe across multiple business units. If I ask you, what has been that biggest challenge that you have faced in this implementation? And what would be that one proud story that you would like to share with the audience?
Definitely. Like I said, every transformation has been very special, very unique for me in my career. And it also brings in a lot of challenges. The happiness, the sense of achievement is there in each of these transformation when the organization and the people achieve a certain milestone. And in one of the organizations, the biggest challenge that I saw was coming from the organization structure itself. Now, in the organization, which I will not name right now due to certain restrictions, the organization itself was structured in such a way that it was operating in a silo for many years. And, with the practices coming in from Scrum and the Agile Manifesto, there needs to be a collaboration of the team by cross cutting these silos. Now, interestingly, the organization could not achieve a milestone where they can possibly cut across these silos and bring in a cross-cutting, self-organized team. And that was, a very big failure even for the transformation coaches because we could not ensure that the organizations really cut down their silos and the organization itself possibly did not have a mindset, possibly did not have a go ahead for itself to break down those silos because of the business reasons. And since it was working so long in that business, they did not possibly even have the inkling that this would be a biggest problem for them and us as well as agile coaches. The other success stories that I have seen are across various different domains, starting right from the medical healthcare to Finacle, that's the world's largest banking software, to working for organizations like Harman and XP that are into the automotive space. And very recently, I have started to work for a semiconductor domain organization. And I think one of the biggest successes that I have seen is the achievement of business agility for this organization. Now, an organization in a semiconductor domain does not just have software, it also has its tools and hardware. And I think one of the success stories that I was able to achieve till this point was to bring in all the aspects of the value delivery of the customer, be it the software, be it the drivers and the tools, and even the hardware to start adopting these agile, scrum, and safe practices and still get aligned together to deliver value to the customer. Because for a customer, these three combined acted as the entire value. I think that was one of the successes that I have seen in the recent past. And much of the credit also goes to the leadership team who believed, who had the faith that, Agile and Scrum and Safe are not just for the software. In fact, they can be extended to other parts of the organization, including the drivers, the tools, the hardware. And they are also now looking at bringing it to other parts of the organization. For example, the product management, the marketing group, the sales group, which I believe is a true sense of business agility that the organizations should strive to achieve, Satya.
Great point. I think you talked about how companies are now moving away from processes, just taking Scrum Kanban and moving on to how you can provide value to the customer. I think it has been a pivotal shift in the last few years. In fact, as we see this journey go along with your experience, how do you see the agile methodologies evolve in the next decade or so?
Definitely, till this point in the last 2 decades or so, Agile Manifesto has gotten a lot of values and principles that people have started to adopt over a period of time from the existing Scrum practices, which earlier were assumed that can work only for certain organizations, certain teams, certain domains, has started to get embraced across various functions in the organization. While I still see there is scope for organizations to start adopting agile and as a mindset, not just for their core function teams, but like I mentioned earlier, maybe start using the practices and principles across various domains, various functions, and various levels in the organizations. And that's where I see agile still has a potential to get adopted at these levels in the organization. Now, with the coming of more of AI and the machine learning and maybe other tools, along with changes in the technology that keeps happening, I think over a periodic time as a cyclic change, adoption of agile along with these changes is going to be very very interesting part to see Because while at the one part we are saying the processes needs to be improved, the processes need to align with these changes, and how does the organization also adopt these other changes happening outside in the market to make sure together it delivers value to our customers. And I also look forward to see how agile gets implemented in different other domains. For example, the semiconductor has now started to see a jump in the agile adoption. Maybe gaming, that's another domain that possibly would have been a very good candidate to look at these. And I don't know, Satya, maybe later on robotics, maybe later on, the rocket science, or maybe we going to Mars can be based on the Agile Manifesto values and principles. Looking forward to that as well.
Future looks great, where agility getting in and eventually delivering value to the customers. I'm sure we'll have a lot of friction. Like you said, the waterfall to agile mindset had a lot of friction. Going into all these new areas, I am assuming that the friction will be little less, if not zero, but hopefully will be there. Of late, you talked about the new technologies, the periodic shift that is coming on. I'm sure it will continue. And if you look at today, agile and AI, these are the two keywords, the buzzwords of the industry. I would say these are match made in heaven. Or do you still think they are not? Are they work in progress? How are you approaching this intersection of agile and AI?
Definitely, it's a very very interesting combination because while AI, we all know artificial intelligence, which kind of brings in another entity that has a high level of intelligence. I see this amalgamation as a very interesting aspect. Now, while AI would take care of all the monotonous, repeatable kind of work that we have been talking about doing, even in, for example, the DevOps with the help of automation, I think AI is going to be very, very instrumental for especially the agile coaches and the change agents to bring in the aspect of trends and insights that the organization has been doing while adopting agile. For example, if your organization is doing retro for quite a few PIs and quite a few sprints, AI will definitely help you get those trends and insights and ensure that you have the right direction, which of course has to be done with the help of leadership to look forward to see where does it take the organization into new horizons. At the same time, I also believe that AI possibly cannot replace the human mind completely. For example, an agile coach observing a team doing any of their meetings, be it daily stand up or, their sprint planning or their retros, brings in a very different dimension as compared to what AI's insights and predictabilities are. So I think this combination is going to be very exciting. And I see a lot of tools that can possibly help agile coaches, the change agents, to identify such a need of improvement by looking at the data that has been created over a period of time. And not just AI, I think the data science, maybe the use of statistics is going to be a cherry on the top to ensure that the organizations use them very effectively to get those deeper insights, Satya. And I look forward to this interesting future that we all have in front of us and a very new kind of a journey that I hope brings in a lot of value to the customers who are undergoing this transformation change.
Absolutely. I think the future is limitless. The possibilities are limitless. But I think you touched upon a great point that AI will not be replacing a coach or a scrum master. The observation powers that we bring in, the kind of data that we have, they eventually lead to the collaboration between human and machine. That's the future. Thank you, Neeraj, for all these insights. It was really great. I've covered quite a sprint today, from waterfall days to AI-driven agile. And trust me, this is the first leg of the journey. I think in the subsequent sessions, we'll dive deep into the industry platforms, the pragmatic frameworks, and maybe how business agility is breaking out of IT, like you mentioned, into hardware, maybe gaming, and into every aspects of the enterprise. So stay tuned. You don't want to miss it. Keep in track, keep in touch. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Thank you, Satya. Great session. And I think I was able to add more information, more value to our viewers who can possibly take a leaf or two out of this and maybe look at something interesting, something new moving forward. Thank you. And
Absolutely.
see you soon, Satya. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.